Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to a bit of a way too early look at the potential 2024 primary field. The final three candidates I'm going to talk about are actually I'm going to call my WTF candidates. The what's their appeal candidates. These people probably won't run, and if they do, they almost certainly won't do very well, and they won't be serious contenders, right? So that's but you always have those what candidates appear in primary fields. Marianne Williamson, Andrew Yang, and Mike Gravel come to mind for the Democrats. I think it was, who's the other one? Was it Michael Bennett from Colorado, and as well was another good what's his appeal? Bloomberg as well, I would argue, is that WTF candidate for the 2020 Democratic primary. But some of these are more lackluster candidates. Some of these are better candidates. Some of these would give Biden a run for his money in 2024. Some would not. And by the way, I'm assuming that Biden runs again in 2024. He makes it 4 years because I don't think it's reasonable to assume otherwise. And I think to assume otherwise is... I don't like doing it. It's one of the reasons why I assumed that Donald Trump wouldn't get impeached and removed from office. And why, and all sorts of other things, I don't like to make assumptions about candidates making it the 4 years or not making it about. So I decided to err on the side of history and say they'll make it 4 years. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a look. And this is in no particular order except for the final three. And we're going to start with, sorry about that. Let's make sure we're still going. Cool. We're going to start with Nikki Haley. Really? There we go. Come on. We're going to start with Nikki Haley. And the reason why... Actually, I am putting her first for a very good reason. I think she is the best candidate that the Republicans could put forward in 2024. And the reasons why I say that is she is a lot closer to the old George W. Bush wing of the party. She is part of the more, compassionate conservative wing of the Republican Party. Nikki Haley is somebody who can appeal to suburbanites. Yeah. She is also somebody who could do very well in rural areas because she does have very good conservative credentials. In addition to this, Nikki Haley would, of course, be, if she was put on, to win the primaries, she would, of course, be running to be the first woman to become president. And, well, it'd be very hard, it would be very interesting to see the people who argued, it's time we had a woman president, then try to argue that you should elect an old senile white guy against a woman whose parents were immigrants into this country from, I want to say it was India? I don't actually remember. But yeah, it would be very interesting to see that argument. Basically, she takes away all of the arguments that progressives and Democrats have used against Republicans. And she's from the South. And I have a little bit of a weird theory that Americans really like electing Southern presidents. It's just a weird little theory that I have. But it kind of makes sense because Trump and Biden, as well as Obama, Trump, Biden, Barack Obama, I think, other than that, you've had Bill Clinton for 2 terms, you had George W. Bush for 2 terms. But you also had prior to that Jimmy Carter. I'm trying to remember some of the others, but just something. It's weird, but a lot of our presidents have been a lot closer to the South. And I've kind of said this as a mark my words already, but the next Republican president is going to be from South Carolina. I really do believe that. And that's because I think Nikki Haley and somebody else who's going to be on this list a little bit later is also a very good potential candidate. Now, I could throw Lindsey Graham into this list, but I won't, because this list is already kind of South Carolina-centric. But yeah, I also think that Nikki Haley wouldn't make a terrible president because she was a governor, and I think governors make better presidents than senators. Anyway, speaking of governors, we have the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who would do very well with the Trump wing of the party. And he would also be a very difficult candidate to beat in a general election. Number one, he comes from a critical swing state, Florida. He is very good at campaigning. No, really? 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 Sorry about that. Just had to flip it because on my screen it showed it went back to Nikki Haley. But anyway, he's good at campaigning. He would almost certainly win Florida no matter what. And he's a little bit more in line with the campaigning style and the rhetoric style of the pre-Trump Republican Party that's able to appeal to suburbanites, that can appeal to more college-educated voters, while still not losing the Republican Party's growing edge among the white working class. He also has appeal to, at least in Florida, Hispanic voters, which is something the Republican Party needs to get a hold of and needs to actually do. So I definitely think DeSantis would be very competitive in a primary, and like I said, he's competitive with the Trump wing of the party, so definitely someone to keep an eye out for. Next on our list is, of course, Tim Scott. And again, South Carolina-centric. He definitely would have a very strong campaign message, and I think he kind of tested it out with his speech at the Republican convention this year. From cotton to Congress in 3 generations. And, Tim Scott worked very hard on the bipartisan criminal justice reform bill. He was central in promoting economic opportunity zones that were part of Trump's 2017 tax bill. I think he's overall a very good candidate and a potentially very strong candidate going forward. It'll be interesting to see how he competes for the more old school W. Bush wing of the party. I'll call them the neocon wing of the party. But he's definitely of the type that I think if things fall right for him in Iowa and New Hampshire, he'd be very tough to beat in South Carolina. And the same goes for Nikki Haley. And honestly, those early primaries are important. They're actually slightly less important for the Republicans than they are for the Democrats, simply because the only really Republican state in that is South Carolina. And so that's another reason why I believe that Southerners tend to have a slight advantage in the Republican Party, is because the first state that is already very Republican in the primaries nowadays is South Carolina. And it is winner take all. So it's going to be tough, and you may have an interesting candidate win if both, say, Haley and Scott are ahead or in the race going into South Carolina. Because you may have someone else win it when otherwise one of those two would. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there. Then we have another Floridian. We've had 2 people from South Carolina, 2 people from Florida, and this is Rick Scott. You could argue this list is actually more Florida-centric. But Rick Scott has a very good history of winning tight competitive elections. He won 2 extremely competitive gubernatorial elections, and then he jumped into a Senate race, which was, I think every handicapper said it was going to go to Bill Nelson. And then Rick Scott managed to win it by a pretty good margin by Florida standards. So, yeah, Rick Scott is definitely someone who is not to be underestimated when it comes to campaigning. And he knows how to drive out turnout, and he's kind of that Florida Republican, which is actually a surprisingly tough brand to pin down, but it would also be a very tough brand to beat in Florida. And Florida is a very important state in the Republican primaries. And now we move on to someone whom I think is going to do worse than he did in 2016 if he runs, and that's Ted Cruz. And let me put it this way, Ted Cruz made the right decision by growing a beard. That's not even a debate. And I'm not just saying that because of my glorious facial hair. No, I'm saying that because he really needed that to look more photogenic, and dare I say it, he looks more like he should be in government with the facial hair than he did when he didn't have it. Ted Cruz, keep the beard. That said, I think the Tea Party movement is kind of just, its time in the spotlight is kind of done. And I think that Ted Cruz would not do so well in a primary. Not in 2024. 8 years is a long time. He was a major player in 2016. Trump kind of thrubbed him back down to reality. And I'm not sure he would do so well, especially with the fact that I'm not sure he would be able to hold the front in Texas. And part of that's because, well, he isn't as well liked in Texas as I think any other statewide elected Republican in Texas. Greg Abbott's more popular, John Cornyn's more popular, and the other figures are more popular. So Ted Cruz is definitely a love him or hate him type person. And he only barely won in 2018 to, in my opinion, a slightly subpar candidate in Beto O'Rourke. Now, at the end of the day, that race was very nationalized, and you had Democratic turnout. It reached kind of insane numbers. So, there's that. Now we have the candidate whom I really hope he runs, and that is Rand Paul. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise that I really like Rand Paul. I don't, by the way, this is just because I think Rand Paul might consider a run. After all, his dad made 2 runs, so we still got to wait for Rand to make another one. And I think he's actually significantly well positioned to be able to make a reasonable argument for the Trump wing of the party. After all, Rand Paul was one of the first major Republicans to endorse Trump after he dropped out of the primary race. And Rand Paul, I think he explained it by saying, hey, I signed a pledge to support the eventual Republican nominee. I'm going to honor that pledge. Rand Paul was also critical in sponsoring legislation that Trump eventually signed, including the criminal justice reform bill. I believe that was a bill that he co-sponsored or co-wrote with New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. It may have been a slightly different bill. And Rand Paul definitely helped keep Trump on the path of fewer foreign interventions and fewer aggressive entanglements abroad. Rand Paul is, of course, also very well positioned to win the libertarian wing of the party. I mean, he definitely can make the argument that his father, that he is his father's son, and that, it's happening, as that famous gif goes. I wish I could put that as a thumbnail. But he's also somebody who could do very well with college-educated voters and suburbanites. That said, it is kind of a shame he got rid of his COVID beard and is back to being clean-shaven. I was really hoping that beards were becoming much more in fashion now among the Republican Party, and really just among male politicians as a whole. And I think they are, and I'm working on a video to talk about the history of facial hair in politics. But anyway, I do like how he has the Constitution tie. Pretty much sums up where he's coming from on that one. So he'd also be able to make very good arguments regarding the healthcare system. He is, after all, a licensed medical doctor, ophthalmologist, but, at the end of the day, it is still a medical degree. So there's that. Then we have kind of one of the first dark horse / really candidates. I think if I was making this video about 3 or 4 months ago, or if I was making this about, basically after, right at the end of January, or right as January was ending, Greg Abbott would have been much higher on my, he'd be a decent candidate for the Republicans to put forward. He'd do a very good job in keeping Texas in the fold in 2024. And he is much more electable than Trump. He's not a Trump Republican. He has a very strong brand in Texas, and he would be able to make reasonable arguments to groups that the GOP is kind of faltering among, and maybe even wants to expand out to and reach out to more. Problem is, after the storms that hit Texas, the winter storms that hit Texas, and the frigid air that hit Texas recently, this is not so good of a look. I think he's made the best response he reasonably can. The failures of ERCOT, Texas's electric providers and electric management commission, their failures are mostly because it's Texas. How often do they get feet of snow with 0-degree temperatures down to, San Antonio area? How often does that happen? If you answered not often, that's still too often. So, I think people are going to give him too harsh of a time for that. But we'll see going forward. He kind of starts going into, where's his appeal? Especially after the whole winter storm thing. It is definitely a case of what's his actual appeal. Now we talk about Mike Pence, the former vice president. And in the Republican primary, the way I see his candidacy going down is basically not very well. I don't think he'd be able to win the Trump wing of the party anymore. And the type of conservative who would vote for Mike Pence, they're going to get caught up with Ted Cruz and a few others. The other thing is that in a general election, I don't think Mike Pence would do very well. I think he's very good at debating. I think he's very good at communicating. The problem is two words, and that's white bread. He is a bit too bland of a candidate. The fact that a fly landing on his head got more attention than anything he said at the vice presidential debate is telling. So, yeah. Mike Pence, the Wonder Bread candidate. Now we move on to another candidate I would actually not mind seeing in the Oval Office, and that's Ben Sasse of Nebraska. And Ben Sasse makes actually a ton of sense if you actually listen to him speaking in the Senate. During the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, he basically, as part of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he was talking about, kind of as an introduction to asking a question, talking about how Americans treat the judiciary now. They treat the judiciary as a means of understanding and getting recompense from the government, against the government, because the Congress has decided to, in his words, there's no verse of Schoolhouse Rock that says give a bunch of power to unelected bureaucrats in the alphabet soup agencies. He is extremely intelligent, and he's the type of person who definitely can appeal to suburbanites. And because he's in a very Trumpy part, pretty Trumpy part of the nation, the Midwest Great Plains area, he can appeal to those types of voters. At the same time, he might come off as a bit of a policy wonk, and I think he's the type who would only really appeal once you actually get down to a primary. At present, he's the type who's only going to appeal to the Beltway insiders, which that can be a problem. But I definitely think he would make a better candidate in a general election than necessarily a primary. And here we come to the part where I have to disappoint a bunch of Democrats and a bunch of progressives who think that these are great candidates. And this is Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland. And the problem with Larry Hogan is that he is not going to do well in a primary. I don't even think he'd do well in a Republican caucus in Iowa. He's a very liberal Republican. I mean, he makes Charlie Baker look conservative, which is kind of an impressive feat. You can say the same about the whole trifecta, but I'm only going to mention one other of these liberal Republicans. The third, by the way, is Phil Scott of Vermont. If Larry Hogan could do well in the Iowa caucus, I'd say maybe he could squeeze it out if he could win a few states on Super Tuesday. But the problem is he won't appeal to Republican primary voters outside of Maryland. and he won't appeal to... I think he's kind of like Ben Sasse. He appeals to a different type of Republican Beltway insider than Ben Sasse would. Ben Sasse appeals to the National Review type. Larry Hogan appeals to the Joe Scarborough type of Beltway insider. They're the type of people who think Republicans are the ones responsible for asymmetric polarization, when in reality it's the opposite. And that's a very long story. That is a very long story that we don't have time to get into because we need to talk about Charlie Baker now. And yeah, Massachusetts. Charlie Baker is reasonably fiscally conservative, but the problem he has is that, again, his only appeal is to the Beltway insider who thinks that the Republican Party has become too conservative socially. Which, if you actually look at what's happened, the Republican Party has moved a little bit more socially liberal since the 60s. They just haven't made the move as quickly as the Democrats have, which decided to do a line of social liberalism a mile long, and they've been running around on that crack high for about 20 years. And they're looking for their next fix. Anyway, now that I've been demonetized, we're going to talk about Mitt Romney. And all I have to say about this is Mitt Romney's time is kind of gone. He's senator from Utah, and I actually think he kind of represents Utah very well. He's almost... And that's the thing. Utah Republicans are either like Mike Lee, or they're like Orrin Hatch, or they're like Mitt Romney. So it's a very interesting state, but it also leads to them getting candidates who are maybe not quite what you would expect for the national Republican environment. That said, Mitt Romney does maybe still have a campaign apparatus from 2012, so he may be able to mount a slightly better primary run if he can get the ball rolling again. So I wouldn't count him out. It's just, I think his time is gone, and he also is going to have a lot of his policy is, yeah, he's still got some baggage from that as well. Now we need to talk about Marco Rubio from Florida. Marco Rubio is fluent in Spanish, which is something that could definitely be an advantage for the Republicans going forward, especially in the Rio Grande Valley, especially in New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado. Hell, it may even help them a touch in California. Marco Rubio might be able to win Miami-Dade County in a presidential election. Marco Rubio is somebody else who definitely fits what people remember the GOP as from the Bush era, who can appeal to people who are somewhat socially conservative, but maybe is not super hardline Trump. Rubio's very popular in Florida, and Florida's a very critical state. He's telegenic, he's intelligent, he speaks very well, he communicates his ideas very well. But I'm skeptical he can win a primary. I mean, he lost to Trump in his own home state of Florida in the Republican primary. Now, that said, I think part of that is because Donald Trump did extremely well with what I call the Florida man vote. And that's basically the panhandle, the type that you would expect to see riding in on an alligator into the hardware store. Now we get on to the 3 WTF candidates. And these are the candidates who combine a mix of what's their appeal, you're really trying too hard to get to the Trump wing of the party, and the why is this run even a thing, or the WTF businessman run, which you could actually argue that Donald Trump was the WTF businessman run in 2016. It's just not normal that these types of candidates win. And this is Kristi Noem of South Dakota. Now, the reason this is a WTF run is because she is trying way too hard to get the Trump wing of the party if she wants to run in 2024. Because while I agree that with her policy that South Dakota didn't shut down at all, no mandates, no lockdowns, no nothing. And South Dakota didn't do terribly in the pandemic. The issue is that this is not a popular stance nationally. It's also not the most popular thing in North Dakota, and she may have put herself at risk in her re-election bid. But I could see her doing not terribly in a Republican primary, which is a lot more partisan, a lot more hardcore conservative. So weird things can happen. You can get some really interesting battles in primaries. Take a look at any Democratic primary for a good example. Though, typically the establishment candidate wins there. Yeah. The next WTF candidate we have is Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, as he's well known as. Yeah, this is a WTF businessman run. I would not be shocked if Mike Lindell won. He's bringing back the good old 70s film stash. We'll go with that one. He's from Minnesota, so maybe he'd be able to do well with the blue-collar steel worker, the industrial worker in, say, the Iron Range, in Macomb County, maybe even in Wayne County, in Michigan. You know, your Youngstown areas, your Allegheny counties, coal country type. But I'm doubtful about his ability to appeal nationally. You know, I just don't see it. And then somebody who I've seen thrown around, and this is going to be don't knock it till you actually hear the arguments. Tom Brady. He's won 1 million Super Bowls, may as well win the presidency, right? In all seriousness, this is not the craziest explanation I've ever heard. He could appeal to the Trump wing of the party. After all, he did have a MAGA hat in his locker during his days in Massachusetts with the New England Patriots. He is now a certified Florida man. It's not even a joke. He accidentally walked into the wrong person's house. That's not a joke. Because he thought he was going to his coach's house and he walked into the wrong house. Yeah. But sometimes you'll hear Peyton Manning thrown around in a possible run as a Republican for the Senate in Tennessee. Tom Brady makes a lot more sense because in an interview one time he said his craziest dream was to be a senator. That means he's inclined to do it. Now, if he were to do it, he shouldn't run as a Republican. Well, actually, he probably should because he actually has some reasonable ties to the Republican Party. He grew up in California when the Reagan faction dominated those politics. And he grew up in a part of California that's, I think, still not unconservative. And again, he has a connection to the Trump wing of the party, and but he also doesn't seem like the type that is, it's hard to actually tell what his political positions are at this stage. But the fact that he has expressed interest in entering politics after he retires from the NFL, which who knows when that's going to be, is something that you could say is, hey, he wouldn't be the worst candidate. And that's the thing. It would be very difficult for people to argue a lot of things against him because he's had to deal with, complex issues while being the leader in a locker room, a very diverse locker room. He would definitely be the type of person who could win, certain types of vote. I mean, the working class vote, what's the most popular sport among people in working class neighborhoods in the swing states? Guess what? It's American football. It's football. And, well, that said, it is kind of a WTF, what's his actual real appeal position? But let's not forget, quarterbacks have not been, and football players in general, have not been unsuccessful in politics. Runyon in New Jersey, Steve Largent in Oklahoma, Jack Kemp in New York, specifically Buffalo. And you've got, Eisenhower played in college, but that was back before helmets were a thing. Trying to think, who else? One of our Supreme Court justices, Byron White. He played professional football. Pro Football Hall of Famer was on the Minnesota Supreme Court, Alan Page. It doesn't sound as crazy as it does when you first look at that. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. My personal take is that a Ron DeSantis or a Nikki Haley type is going to win, but Ron DeSantis is probably the best. Now, some of you may be wondering why I left out Donald Trump. Well, I'm leaving him out for, I don't think he should run, basically. Reasons. Anyway, I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. A like, a comment, and subscription is greatly appreciated. And I'll see you all next time. Tomorrow I'll be streaming sometime late. So, take it easy. Bye, y'all.